Quite often at major events, competitions, games, match day, whatever it may be, we hear about athletes choking. But what does this actually mean in terms of performance, and how can we start to work around the ins and outs of making sure we perform when we need to? Today we're going to break down the basics of sports psychology in terms of why athletes choke and how they choke, some of the factors, so that it's going to help you and your athletes, if you're a coach out there, prepare as best you can to make sure that performances happen when they need to. Hey guys, Nick here. Welcome back to the channel, talking science of endurance and everything sports science in general. Please consider subscribing down below if you've been enjoying the content so far, or welcome to the channel if you're watching for the first time. Hit that big red sub button to keep up to date with all the latest content coming out at the moment. Like I said in the intro, a big topic we hear about all the time, particularly at major events, is this athlete's choked. It's a phrase you might see in the media all the time, is that this particular team choked, or this particular athlete didn't live up to their expectations in terms of performance. And I really want to go into, I guess, the why behind this choking, I guess, mechanism, or why athletes don't perform when they need to under pressure. And it really comes down to the fundamental ability of that person to cope with the scenario. It's our ability to cope with situations and deal with the stresses that are coming at us. And we quite often see the best athletes in the world are able to do this. And that's why the best athletes are the best athletes, because they can perform day in, day out when they need to, regardless of the situation, regardless of the magnitude or the size of the event. They're able to go and perform when they need to because their coping mechanism is able to overcome all those external things. And what do I mean by a coping mechanism? It's their ability to just get locked into the task fundamentally. And we hear, you might have heard a lot over the last little while, it's been a big thing in the last couple of years in terms of mindfulness and various psychological training techniques, doing some breathing, bringing yourself back to the present. And all of this type of stuff is there mainly for the fact of enabling athletes to deal with pressure environments and perform under pressure, and use some of these strategies and techniques to optimize their actual physical execution of skills and what they need to do to be a successful athlete. And we can apply this to any level. It's not just the elite athletes that benefit from this. It's right through the amateur spectrum, any different type of event, any different type of athlete, endurance athletes, team sport athletes, even in my own stuff in terms of officiating. I'm not necessarily winning or losing anything, but I need to be present in the moment and actually perform under high pressure situations for the benefit of the game as an official or as an umpire. So it's the type of thing that's very, very useful. It can also be applied into the workplace as well. So what we need to first understand is, well, why, like I said, why do athletes choke? And it's this fundamental inability to cope or have a coping mechanism that can handle the situation. And a lot of this comes down to a couple of key things. It comes down to an ability to not be able to put distractions aside. There's a lot of information out there in terms of research around distraction, what we call distraction theories, and athletes being caught up in stimulus that isn't necessarily relevant. And this is where the best athletes and some of the more experienced athletes typically make really, really good decisions, is because they take in what they call the relevant cues. They take in the important information and can filter out very, very quickly stuff that's unimportant. Let's use the example of a football player or a soccer player. You're taking a shot at goal or a penalty or whatever it may be in kind of a big crowd, and you're more focused on the big crowd, the noises around you, where your opponents are, and you're not focused on the relevant cue of, well, where do I want to put the ball in the back of the net, or where do I want to score in the goal, and how am I actually going to kick the ball? If you're a triathlete, you're more focused on the people flying past you, and you're not worried about, okay, am I actually leaving my time trial position too much on the bike and creating unnecessary drag? Am I moving my body side to side too much, or is my head a little bit too high today? All of these little things that work into executing the skill, we're getting caught up in these external distractions. So distractions play a really big part, and that's where, if you can't shut out some of those distractions, you don't have to shut out all of them, because taking them in and accepting and embracing that they're there is actually sometimes a better way to deal with it, rather than just trying to flat out ignore it, because they're going to come at you regardless. It's the type of thing, if you can just brace those distractions are there and then just refocus and center yourself back onto the task, that's really critical. And again, that's where this mindfulness sort of stuff comes in, because using some simple things like breathing techniques just recenters back internally and just refocuses the mind on, all right, I'm just going to work on this one simple task, which is breathing. And I know we sometimes take it for granted, but if I'm just going to refocus and just breathe for a little bit, it brings me back to me and what am I doing right now? What am I doing right now? I'm pedaling the bike, or I'm running. I need to make sure my form is consistent. I'm swimming, so I need to make sure that I'm just working through a nice routine stroke. I'm out in the field, I need to make sure I'm executing my skills really well, and just sort of bring everything back to a much more controllable level. And that's where we can get into things like what we call flow state. And if you've ever experienced this period of your racing, competition, game day, whatever it is, we feel like things are moving slowly around you and comparative to normal. This is where we're in our optimal performance, because we're removing all those external irrelevant cues, and we're just focusing on the important information, accepting that there are distractions around us, but we're not buying into them. We're just going, yeah, there's someone over there making a lot of noise, or there's an opponent over there that's moving, but I don't need to worry about that because I'm focused on my performance. So you just bring it all back to you and being very, very present. So getting rid of the distractions is, and I guess making sure we embrace the distraction but don't buy into them is a really key component. Another thing that leads into it is when we do sometimes get caught up in the distractions, even pre-event or during the event, regardless, it starts to lift our level of what we call anxiety and ultimately arousal as well. And what I mean by those terms is anxiety is something that we shouldn't necessarily, I say, push aside, similar to distractions. It's embrace some of that anxiety because some of it can actually be quite useful for us. That good positive nervous energy that we can sometimes get pre-race or pre-game day, whatever, you can actually use that to your advantage if you're an athlete who feels like they need to be a little bit sort of up and about, get the heart rate going. You can use that to your advantage in some circumstances. In others, we don't necessarily want to buy into that, and we want to actually limit that because that's going to get the heart, like I said, get the heart rate up. If you're an endurance athlete, you may not want to get the heart rate up before you get into the pool or into the water, before you start swimming, whatever it may be. So we actually want to sort of control a little bit of that nervous energy, and again, using some of that mindfulness to take out some distractions and move away from that sort of anxious environment and get what we call our arousal. So essentially just how excited or I guess chilled out we are is a bit of a basic scale of it. Get ourselves prepared more optimally for what we need to do. If we're in an event where you have to go run through someone like rugby or a football game, you have to run as hard as you can and crash into them, you probably want to be a bit more excited, a bit more use of that nervous energy to provide a bit of physicality on the field. If you're an endurance athlete who just needs to go out in a triathlon or a marathon runner and set a nice comfortable pace from the start, probably want to be a bit more chilled out. Not so chilled out that you're just lethargic and slow, but you want to be a bit more relaxed because you don't have to run through a brick wall. You're just going out and just setting a nice comfortable pace and settling into the race. So manipulating some of those techniques and accepting that there are these stresses going on, but knowing how to sort of bring everything back into a nice calm sort of manner is a really good way of working onto that. Downside of letting that all go and buying into some of these distractions and the anxiety side of things is we start to time travel. And what I mean by that is anxiety is the best way to think far too forward ahead or think far too back and not focus on the exact task at hand. And really, it's the type of thing, if you've ever been caught up in the moment of, well, what if this happens halfway through the bike, or what is going to happen once I get to the run? I don't know what's going to happen. I hope it's going to go well. Or last time in a race I sort of blew up and it didn't go so well, and blah, blah, blah. If you start time traveling backwards and forwards, that's just going to compound things and compound those distractions even internally and not even worry about other things. So it's the type of thing, if we don't necessarily buy into the distractions, we can keep our arousal and our anxiety in check. It's the type of thing we start to, free ourselves of the possibility of making matters worse. It's almost a snowball. Once the ball gets rolling, some of these things can just start to get a bit out of control in the moment. Before you know it, that's where choking is going to occur, when all of this becomes overwhelming. And again, right back to the fundamentals, as I said at the beginning, our coping mechanism can't handle the stresses or the situation that is being presented to us. And that's where the snowball just rolling down the hill far too fast, we can't stop it. We just have to let it run its course, and we'll reset and try and go again for the next one. Last thing I'm going to talk about is once all this starts to kick in and we start buying into this time traveling, sort of our mind goes forward and backwards, is that we start to get into periods, and particularly higher trained athletes, we do this a lot, I do it myself, we're very good at regulating and self-regulating and understanding where we went wrong in certain areas, what we need to fixing things on the fly. If we had an error in terms of skill execution, if our run technique's slightly out, we're very good at picking up these things as we go. Once this snowball gets rolling though, it's really easy to then turn that from a positive in terms of being able to pick up some of those mistakes and keep us on track into over-analysis, and then getting into a bit of paralysis by analysis in terms of overthinking things. And essentially where the science shows us we go is this over self-regulation is another reason why athletes choke, is because they're overthinking it so much to be like, I'm so hyper-focused on this task and going about it the wrong way in terms of that coming back to the present. Where do they end up? They end up thinking through it too much, and it's like you're a novice again. It's like you're back down as a beginner thinking about every little component and how do I execute it, whereas these should just be automatic responses that we just allow us to do. And that's where our preparation and building coping mechanisms isn't necessarily just in the mind, it's just about setting automatic habits. You should be able to get in the water and go, all right, I know my technique is going to hold up, I've prepared as best I can, I just need to execute now, and that's okay, and I can allow that to take care of itself. I know that my breathing's going to be good in the right position. I know that my arms on the run are going to be swinging in a nice routine way and nice and compact in. I'm not going to be all over the place. These automatic things that we, I guess, take for granted sometimes, if we overanalyze and think them, we end up putting ourselves back as if we're learning them for the first time. And that's where skill errors happen, because there is going to be a breakdown. That's why beginners are beginners for a reason. They make lots of mistakes because they don't have that automatic process and that roadmap, if you like, in their brains to be able to go, all right, these are the things I need to do, go and execute. It's here's step 1, step 2, what was step 3 again? Okay, well, it's too late now because I've too slow through the process and I've tried to execute the skill and I can't do it. That's why athletes like football players, and particularly the AFL, get ripped a lot in terms of the forwards. They choke and they can't kick goals because they're professional athletes, and we wonder why they can't kick a goal. It's like, well, fundamentally it comes back to they can't cope with the situation from a psychological perspective. They're overthinking their technique. They're now going through and kicking as if they're an under 12 trying to kick for goal, and they're spraying it everywhere. If they just go through their process and back their preparation in, maybe that's just one strategy to be able to go, all right, I can actually kick a goal now. It's just an automatic. And you see that happen with athletes who go through form slumps and then get out of it. They're all of a sudden kicking goal after goal after goal and performing really, really well because their coping mechanism has kicked in, or it's improved significantly to allow them to handle the situation. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight in terms of some of the reasons as to why athletes choke and some of the ways we can get around it and build on that. Have you ever choked in competition? I'd love to hear your stories. I know I have personally, but I'd love to hear when you guys have choked or you've seen an athlete choke. Leave some examples down in the comments below. If you've got any questions about the psychology type of thing, or you want to hear more about the sports psych stuff, I'm starting to get a bit more interested in it and reading a little bit more. So happy to hear any thoughts or any suggestions for videos down in the comments as well. As always, please make sure you hit the subscribe button to keep supporting the channel. That is it for today, and we'll see you in the next one.